Japan and Sweden are basically the same country, cult speaking of course, and this is an objective fact. It's not just me being a Swebo, but I will show you here the evidence that Japan and Sweden actually are two most culturally close countries in the world compared to each other. This is an actual fact. I will prove it to you in this video here. And after that, I will explain to you how, of course, it affects the modern connection, right? For example, why is anime so big in Sweden? Short answer, which is very relatable, right? The Japanese issues are same in Sweden, right? So if you're new to the channel, my name is Myrmonden. I'm a behavioral scientist, among other things. So I've given lectures on universities. I've written papers, a little bit science stuff, books and so on, right? About behavioral stuff, behavioral science. My expertise is like behavioral economy in IT, right? So a company might hire me to be like, oh, we wanna make this Tinder app in Norway, you know, how should we make it? What should we do? So if you like the video, please subscribe, press the like button, right? You know, it helps me out. Leave a comment below what you guys think, so on, right? I can talk a lot about this stuff, but of course, you know, I am Swedish Norwegian, right? I love anime, whatever, mangas, obviously, and it's always been interesting to me how Sweden and Japan are so incredibly similar. They really are, as shown here. They really are very similar, and many animes that are kind of obscure or whatever perfectly fit into like Swedish comedy. Like it's crazy. So let's look at the evidence. You know, Japanese people really love standing in line, right? And really good at queuing and so on. You know what other country is really good at queuing up? Swedes. Yeah, this is a meme, right? Waiting for the bus like a Swede. But honestly, I will show you the evidence how the cultures are very similar. But from a comedic standpoint, yes, this here is true. This is an actual truth, right? Swedes really do wait for the bus like this. And when I went to college, I went to the same college that PewDiePie did, next to a PewDiePie lived on, so Felix, and this is literally how every morning would look. When we go to school, me and Felix, this is literally how people would stand, because there was like a bus station next to where he went to school. So there is a thing in Japan called like mindfulness, being mindful of your surrounding, you know, basically being quiet and ordersome, right, in public. And there's no other country that is more like this than the Swedes, right? So for example, the Logan Paul incident where he ran around, you know, Pokeballs or whatever, right? That also would basically have the exact same effect in Sweden as well. Because just like the Japanese, Swedes would never actually have any kind of confrontation, right? Both Japanese and Swedes are incredibly similar in that they're very quiet, very ordersome in public, and they will also never basically confront anyone that they dislike, right? So you actually saw in the Logan Paul video, when he did dumb stuff in Tokyo, no one actually stops him, right? Because yeah, people are like, we can't confront him. There is the exact same effect in Sweden. Swedes, they would also be like, I can't confront him though. They all hate him, they can't say anything. So I watched Sora Troll's video about 10 different weebs, right? About Swedish weeb. And I love it because he's so right, man. He's like, yeah, the Swedish weebs, they're even more shy than the other people. They maintain distance, they're very ordersome, they're very, you know, mindfulness. He's even mentioning it that the Swedish people are a lot like Japanese. Yeah, so he's even, he's like, wait, they act a lot like we do. So there is some actual real evidence that Sweden and Japan are incredibly similar. So here is the cultural map of different cultures on the planet, right? And the biggest thing I keep saying is that Sweden and Japan are incredibly similar on how people act when it comes to order, industrialization, right? How they act in public and so on, right? And basically, I played later in the video, but how people are so relatable to sort of like Bocchi, right? Hit to the Bocchi, Komisan and so on. Those shows are incredibly big in Sweden, right? Because Swedes are even more like Bocchi than Japanese people are. So you can see here, Japan is up here in the top corner here, right? If I zoom out here, make Bocchi tinier here. So if you look at this map here, right? So Japan is literally the country in the highest y-axis value, right? In the whole world, okay? So Japan is a very extreme culture. I must say, I'm gonna say it's a good thing, okay? Extreme as in, you know, this is the least extreme country, right? The country in the middle, or the medium values, so they're the least extreme, right? Like Portugal or whatever, they're very close to many other countries. They're much more, obviously, non-extreme. The countries on the far edge are the most extreme, right? Talking about like a normal curve here. Okay, so Japan is incredibly extreme country. Highest, you know, Y value in like traditional secular organization value, okay? Japan highest in the culture there. What other country is equally high? Sweden. So you can basically draw a red line between Sweden and Japan. There's no other countries that are this high in this value of the culture. While it's true, of course, that Japan and Sweden are not on the same level in X value here, right? Which is kind of like how people treat the family and the core family and so on. So in Protestant Europe, it is more like you stand by yourself, right? There's not much respect for your elders or so on. That's probably the biggest difference then. So in Sweden, you have no respect for your grandpa or whatever, right? Which of course in Japan and China and so on is much more respectful of your elders, right? That's kind of the biggest difference there, I suppose, in a short summary of it. But otherwise, in this other value, Sweden and Japan are insanely close, right? Yeah. No other countries are this high. And very important to understand is that not only is Sweden and Japan the only two countries this high in the culture, right? Think about this too. They're also the most extreme, right? Because if Sweden and Japan is down here, like Portugal, Macedonia, Greek, or whatever, yeah, these guys are also close. Sure they are. However, they're in the middle, right? So Greeks close to many other countries, you know. Japan is the only country this high in the list, right? And Sweden. So Japan and Sweden, highest, most extreme, wide value cultures, and the only two up there next to each other. So this of course means that Sweden and Japan are literally, factually speaking, incredibly similar. And what this value that measured right is stuff that I mentioned, right? The mindfulness. It is measuring stuff, you know, like you shouldn't do better in public, right? You should stand in line, you should be ordered somewhere. Because there's one thing that's very, very, very similar with Sweden and Japan is actually the bureaucracy. If you haven't worked for the Swedish government and the Japanese government, they're exactly the same. Everything takes 10 years, you know. Everything has to be very, very ordersome. Everything is very transparent. Obviously, corruption is very, very lower in both countries. And Swedes are very, you know, the work ethics is very high in Sweden. Sweden is iconically have incredibly high work ethics. Sweden are by far highest work ethics, average in Europe, and Japan, of course, also famously high work ethics, right? So work ethics, industrialization, organization, all this stuff, you know, and also then, of course, mindfulness, standing in line, queuing up, and so on. All this stuff is incredibly ingrained in both the cultures and are very, very similar then. And again, this is my opinion. I'm not being a sweep because I want to be. This is actual facts, and all the measurable facts for the last like 20 years of cultural mapping and heat mapping and so on will like show you every time that Sweden and Japan are the most extreme cultures and they're the most similar to each other in this aspect, right? So basically 50% of Japanese culture is Sweden or vice versa. I mean, in one of the values are incredibly similar. Like, and it's, again, both these countries are in the most highest value, right, of this value of culture, which means that no other country is actually as similar to Japan as Sweden in this particular way of like organization, queuing up in line and so on. And then also, of course, talking about animes, right, commented soon in the video, stuff like Bocchi, right, stuff like Bocchi, no other country is as much Bocchi like Sweden and Japan, because it's much like you have to be afraid of your neighbors, you have to go out there, you have to be, you know, this kind of culture, this kind of joking, this kind of comedy really works in Sweden because Swedes are even more like Bocchi, right, than the Japanese. So that's a massive reason, right, why stuff like Bocchi is popular in Sweden, because it's so relatable. And while I'm on the topic, let me explain this thing here, right? Swedish culture is very introverted, right? It's famously the most introverted culture in the world. As I showed you, it's the most extreme culture in the world, right? In that axle. And the fun thing is that Swedish culture is notoriously known for that the Swedes themselves will deny having a culture, which of course sounds crazy, but think about it. Swedish culture is so incredibly extreme that it's so far extreme that no other country is the same, so the Swedes themselves will deny having a culture, not because people like to say it's because like it's like water, it's like a fish in the water. No, that's wrong. It's not because it's fish in the water, it's because Swedish culture is the most extreme culture in the world in some ways, and one of the extremities is to pretend you don't have a culture that no other culture has, but that's a very Swedish culture thing. That's another video, but I'll point it out. Look at the map. Sweden is the highest, you know, X and Y value, right? It is that no other country is up here. No. Yes, Japan is the highest, same, value, but Sweden is maximum X and Y. Of course, Norway and so on are close to it, but no, Sweden actually has the most extreme culture in the world, like straight up, comparably to all the countries. So now we kind of covered how the cultures are very similar, and they really are, like a factual standpoint. And from my own perspective, having worked both in Japan, Sweden, America, they're very, very similar. Like Japan and Sweden is so much more similar than America. You know, USA is very different than either of them. Extroverted, people are more aggressive, you know, especially, again, when you're out in New York or, you know, California or Santa Monica, whatever, or like LA or whatever, you know, people are way more out there, right? You know, Japanese people and people are very much, you know, Very ordersome, yeah, very, very ordersome. So that's probably the biggest difference. It's probably if you just walk on the street, you know, in America, whatever, compared to either Sweden or Japan, right? Very, very similar. And honestly, I keep saying it, but yeah, I feel the same thing. You know, I know a lot of people in Korea, right, and China and so on, right. And when I've been, I think also it feels more similar. Honestly, it feels, yeah, like China also feels more similar. Walking in China compared to walking in Sweden, than compared to like America and so on. It really does. But anyway, let's now talk about how some animes that are popular in Sweden, right? So one thing I say immediately is that hentai is big in Sweden. No, but the thing is that anime, manga, and also yeah, video games, of course, JRPGs are very, very big in Sweden, right? Very, very big. And like a side note, every woman I have ever worked with in Sweden, or only game companies, but still, only at game companies, but still, are always into anime and hentai, like straight up. It always comes up to for some reason. Maybe I'm a perv. But yeah, like literally, every woman I ever worked with in Sweden have been massive anime and manga fans, like without any question. And they're really into like yaoi and other hen and so on. But hen is the biggest thing in Sweden, you know. AV stuff, hen is the biggest thing by far. And I think it's a very important put out here that really is that you know, obviously men like hen stuff is all right in every country, but it's actually women, the ladies, right, that have a very high percentage of Swedish women are into hentai. Like that is like I mean it again, not to be a perv. I just mean like technically speaking. Like, I mean from a factual standpoint, that is very, very popular, and that speaks volumes, right? But anyway, so the thing is that there's some animes, right, that are incredibly Swedish. I mean, like, they could be made in Sweden, and they make people, like, my mom can watch Jahy and love it, right? Because Jahy Sama is the most Swedish anime ever. So I made a video about that a few years ago when Jahy aired, so links below for that. But, like, literally, Jahy is, like, the perfect example of Swedish comedy. So in Sweden, we have a word called Skadeglädje, which is then Schadenfreude, right, in Swedish. But in Sweden, it's a much better word, and I honestly really would prefer if everyone uses Skadeglädje or Schadenfreude, because this is the most Swedish thing ever. So Germans, okay, but in Sweden, like every TV show is like Jahy. I wanted to make that. Jahy is exactly like basically every TV show in Sweden. So, let me show here. So one of the most popular TV shows in Sweden is Lyxfällan. This has been on for like 10 plus years now. They also have it in Norway or whatever, based on Swedish show. So Lyxfällan is about people, usually a couple, that are terrible at their economy, right? The Lyxfällan luxury trap. So they can't pay the rent or something. And then Sweden, they send this like national economist there, right? Like this guy is like way overqualified. Talk to these like two idiots and be like, wow, you want to save index funds? And he just makes fun of them. He's like, you're freaking idiots. You wasted all your money. And this is like literally the most popular show. It's been going on for years, right? And obviously, this is Jahy. This show is like live action Jahy. Because Jahy is all about a girl, right, that can't save her money, never pays her rent, right? And this is terrible. And the thing is that Sweden loves Skadeglädje. People that are trying to do something, it's like Jahy, like, oh, I will be the demon order, I will be the strongest, right? And then they miserably fail, and then we laugh at them. Like, genuinely speaking, this show is the most popular show in Sweden for like the last 10 years. It's incredibly popular. And everyone loves it, right? Because there's nothing else that Swedes love the most. And that's, of course, Skadeglädje. Skadeglädje literally means, like, damaged happiness. Or like misery happiness, right? Like, you're laughing at someone's misery. And the thing is, Swedish culture, it's so ingrained that you make fun of people that do something wrong, right? Yeah, like, oh, they bought the wrong house. Idiots! They went on to a Hawaii trip! Freaking morons! No, this is the biggest thing ever, and it reminds so much of Jahy, right? Because you know how Jahy is. Jahy is like, oh, I couldn't pay my rent. Great Jahy, you know, she does something stupid, right, and a mistake. So basically, in Swedish culture, it's very ingrained that it's called Jantelagen. Don't think you are anything else, right? Don't think you're better than me, right? It's all about staying in line. Don't go out and don't become the best. Don't try to do something else. Just stand in line, right? As I talked about earlier, because Swedish culture, just like Japanese culture, is very, very organized. It's very bureaucracy-based, right? It's very much follow the line, right? Swedes hate when people go outside the line, right? They hate when people go outside the order of society, right? So, of course, Lyxfällan, for example, is a perfect Swedish television show because it's about people, right, that have taken a loan to go to Hawaii, or they bought a house they can't afford, or they start a company and you know, it's ruined or whatever, right? And then Swedes laugh at that. Swedes are like, what a effing loser, yeah. They wasted all their money, or like, goddamn idiot. They should have stayed in line, you know. They should have stayed in the queue system, yeah. Swedes love to laugh at that. So there are many animes, of course, like Jahy. Now, I do think Jahy is the best Skadeglädje anime out there. But, there are many similar animes, right? We have the same one she's watching right now, Jahy Sama level 1, right? There are many isekais, like Konosuba or whatever, right? It's about laughing at the misery, right? Of a customer, yeah. And so on, like with Sylvia, for example, customer trying to do Sylvia and it's failing and so on, These animes really go, they go a long way in Sweden, yeah. People love Sweden. And of course, other countries that are similar to Sweden, like Denmark, Norway, and so on, Finland, are also really into, of course, Skadeglädje. And then Germany, to some extent, of course, Schadenfreude. But actually, Germany isn't that much into it compared to Swedes, which, again, this is the biggest cultural comedy. Because it feels like half of Swedish live action comedy is all about Skadegjälde. So it's like this show, my mom loves Jahy. She's like, oh, this show is great! Stupid demon god trying to be something, It is so, this is like ingrained society in Sweden, and this is the biggest thing. So all these shows, right, that are very based around people failing, right, which again are very common in Japan, right? As I explained, they are common in Japan, just like they're common in Sweden, because just like Sweden, Japanese people, right, are very ordersome, right? They follow the law, they're very standing in line, right? So it's fun for the Japanese people to laugh at Jahy trying to do something stupid, you know what I mean? It's very ingrained in both the cultures to make comedy shows about people going outside the order, right, and then failing, and that's very funny. That's why, again, then anime has grown, or immediately was related to Sweden, right? Because, well, many of the comedies in Japan, like Konosuba, Jahy, whatever, so on, they really perfectly fit into Swedish society. Like, oh yeah, that's exactly like we were doing, yeah. So that's one thing. As a side note, this is the best part of Lyxfällan. So every episode, after they made fun of the woman or whatever being a complete moron, right? Then these guys, and again, these guys are very overly qualified for this job. It's basically like the best guy in the economy coming to some woman that can't pay her rent, So they make this like this board, right? And they show all the money. She's like, oh, you're spending like $3,000 on rent or this thing, and you're spending, oh, you're a moron. This is how much money you spend on food every day. Oh, your kids also need to have, this food every day. Yeah. So they basically just like make fun of them. And the third column from the right there, right, is sparande. So that is like savings, or basically how much money do you put in every month to index funds, right, or investments or whatever. And every person, literally, every person on the show always has zero, right? Because they're all idiots, so they never have any money in saving accounts, or they never index funds or whatever. They have no understanding of stocks, right? Yeah, never. So it's always zero, and they always make fun of them. I mean, see, they always make fun of her. It's like, you have zero, you spend like 200, yeah, you paid like $10 a month in index funds? You are a complete moron, you're the dumbest person we met, and it's the same thing every episode. Anyway, another thing that's very popular then, right, in Sweden, and generally speaking, I think Scandinavia, especially Sweden, right, is of course Bocchi. Not just Bocchi itself, but the genre, right, so Bocchi, Komi-san, of course, other Bocchi. So if you haven't seen it, this here is Bocchi number 1. Actually, the first Bocchi, Hitto the Bocchi, was out like 2-3 years before Bocchi the Rock, right? Hitto the Bocchi is basically about the girl has no friends, he goes to school, right? She wanna make friends, right? Very similar to Bocchi the Rock, right? Because they're both called Bocchi, like a loner, right? And these shows are absurdly Swedish. The first time I saw Hitto the Bocchi, when she has to first look out the keyhole and it's a neighbors around. That I've seen, literally that scene where she's like, is there any neighbors outside? I don't want to talk to my neighbor, yeah. That scene has been joked in Swedish television for like 50 years. So, basically everything that Bocchi does, right, both these Bocchi does, either Bocchi does, is something I have seen in Swedish comedy shows. Like, almost nothing, honestly, in Hitto the Bocchi or Bocchi the Rock is new to me. Except the general, crazy that Bocchi turning into a monster. But like the actual jokes, her actual issues, her actual behavior is actually exactly the same that I've seen in like 20 plus in Sweden. So there's no wonder, right? And especially these shows too. Like I mentioned, Komi-san, whatever, yeah. All these like social anxiety shows, right? That are very popular in Japan. Also, of course, are incredibly popular in Sweden, right? Because Swedes, even more so thought about, and then even more so, right, are anxiety, yeah. Because there's one thing that Swedes are, as a negative, of course, from their own culture, is social anxiety, right, Swedes are incredibly introverted, right? Like I keep saying, Sweden is the most introverted country in the world, and Japan is number 2, right, basically. So it's like, yeah. But of course, I hope people understand what I made in the video. Because of course, these shows, right, they really work in Sweden, yeah. It's a massive reason, right, why these animes, I mean, for the last 20, 30 years are big in Sweden, right? Because, yeah, Swedes get it, you know? Swedes, they see Bocchi, they're like, oh, I get it, yeah. Every Swede is like, that is me. It's so relatable, you know what I mean? Every Swede. And I know people relate to Bocchi, right? Bocchi was popular last year. But the thing is that, thinking about as a culture, how, you know, as a culture, right? If everyone is like Bocchi, of course, more people will relate to Bocchi, right? I'm not saying that no one relates to her in, like, America, right? But if America is like 50% introvert, extrovert, I mean, more immediate thing, for argument's sake, and Sweden is 100%. Of course, every Swede would relate to Bocchi, but only half in America will. But it's probably a way big difference, because America is very different culture. America is more, actually, it's more like several times more people they will relate to Bocchi in Sweden or Norway than in America, so on. Absolutely. But anyway, the point, it's very, all these, especially these, like, yeah, anxiety shows, but also generally speaking, you know, shows like Eurocamp, whatever, right? It's slice of life comedies, Genshinken, whatever, Access for Days, right? These shows are also quite similar, right? Because again, how people act in society is so similar that a lot of these, like, you know, girls doing cute things or whatever, or guys having a college club or all this stuff, of course, is very similar, you know, to Sweden, yeah. And all the jokes, except when I play like Jahy Sama or whatever, with the bureaucracy, it's like, oh, that's like Sweden. Yeah, all these jokes. And I've been in both countries, I'm like, yeah, it's very similar. And then lastly, I guess, Sweden also was very early, I guess, adopting mangas too. Straight up from Japanese, yeah. Sweden was very early by, like, publishing mangas published in Japan, and then directly doing them in Swedish, and having no English or whatever in between. Many of the countries, like Germany and so on, I think they did, like, you know, they actually bought, I believe, the English, you know, version, right, and then made it into German and so on. But Swedes is bought it directly from Japan most of the time, and very early then. Like One Piece started in the 90s, so yeah, very early. So that's also a side note that Sweden was very early doing, like, straight up Japanese to Swedish translations of manga and books and so on. Very eagerly some, right? But anyway, hope that's the video. Please subscribe, slap button, and have a great day.